It's Friday, August 21st, 2026, and welcome to Furniture Industry News. For about 3 years, every tariff conversation in this business has been a rate conversation. This week, that changed shape. Customs and Border Protection, asked directly, spelled out what has to be inside the value you declare on an invoice, and 2 furniture importers described what it costs to prove where their goods were actually made. The paperwork has quietly become the expensive part. The valuation piece came out of a question the longtime industry columnist Ray Allegrezza put to Customs about a hypothetical $100,000 furniture transaction, with no company named. The value declared on a commercial invoice should be the price the U.S. buyer paid, and certain other amounts have to be layered on top: packing, royalties, production costs, proceeds of resale, selling commissions, and what Customs calls buyer-supplied assists. Failure to include applicable amounts, the agency said, is undervaluing the goods, and it may result in penalties. Here is why that has teeth now. Stay with that hypothetical, at a hypothetical 30% rate. By our arithmetic, duty on a declared $100,000 is $30,000. Duty on a declared $40,000 is $12,000. That is an $18,000 gap on a single order, and it multiplies fast across a season of containers. Under Customs ruling practice, design, engineering, and development work have all landed inside the definition of an assist in particular rulings. So calling a payment a service settles nothing by itself. What governs is what the money actually paid for. Where the question came from needs care. Allegrezza relayed an allegation secondhand and refused to attach it to anyone. A manufacturer told him that an employee working in China and Vietnam had described some large U.S. customers splitting their payments to overseas factories between the merchandise and separate service fees for things like design, engineering, or production supervision. Allegrezza wrote that he has no documentation, no invoices, no contracts, and no customs entry supporting it, and that it is not evidence any company did anything wrong. He also wrote that paying a supplier for legitimate services is ordinary practice. Nothing here is a finding about any company, and I am not repeating it as one.
What is established is the rule, and the rule is the part you can act on. In our July 17th issue, we reported that the Justice Department's trade fraud effort had passed $1 billion in recoveries, and that the importer of record owns entry accuracy and cannot contract it away. So one narrow question for your broker and counsel: what value are we declaring? What are we paying the factory outside it? And can we defend the split? The second story is about origin rather than value. Bruce Krinsky, chief executive of Toe Furniture, sent a letter in mid to late April challenged 17 of his company's entries, covering roughly 45 high-cube 40-foot containers shipped out of Vietnam. Customs wanted proof of origin, and the request went deep into the factories. A component list with purchase receipts, photographs of the plants, employee records, equipment receipts, maintenance logs. 2 of his people spent well over 100 hours on it, more than 1,200 pages. Then, and the order here matters, after all of that was submitted, Customs sent a denial letter. Krinsky said the agency stated it believed the items were produced in China and attached a bill he put at roughly $70,000, the difference between the China rate and the Vietnam rate, plus interest. Those entries dated back to August of 2025, which leaves the company inside a 180-day liquidation deadline to contest the finding. In his words, this is definitely happening, and it is definitely not unique to us. The second case is different. Joram Weinreich, chief executive of Simply Home, said Customs alleged transshipping on a shipment despite the documentation his company supplied. This one was stopped on the way in rather than reopened after clearing. He said they were given a choice: pay $100,000 to release the shipment and possibly recover the money later, or send it back. They sent it back rather than carry that risk on one container. He said Simply Home has been importing from that factory for 10 years, and that the agency stayed unresponsive until an attorney got involved. His account of exactly how the dispute ended is not entirely consistent, and neither executive says Customs ever explained its basis.
The practical read is that origin is no longer settled by a purchase order and a certificate. You have to be able to reconstruct it out of the factory's own records months after a container cleared, and the sourcing switch out of China does not insulate you. So build the evidence file before anybody asks. Component-level bills of materials, proof the factory bought them, plant records, and get the liquidation dates on entries already in the ground from your broker. Now the rate news. The 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion of Canadian goods was due at 12:01 in the morning on August 19th. It has been pushed to 12:01 in the morning on August 22nd, while the two governments try to finish a broader agreement. That is tomorrow morning. President Trump announced the pause on Tuesday night, about 90 minutes before the duties were set to begin, writing that Canada and the United States, subject to finalizing documents, have a deal. Prime Minister Mark Carney was more measured, saying the two countries had made substantial progress, but still had important issues to resolve. Separate duties on Canadian softwood lumber remain unresolved, and none of that is covered by the pause. We reported on July 31st that Canada is the top export market for American-made furniture at nearly $1.5 billion, and was also the number 4 shipper into this market last year at nearly $1.7 billion. The inbound half of that trade, not the furniture going north, was 90 minutes away from a 50% duty, and now has until Saturday morning. Luis Rieska of Zoo Modern told us at the summer Las Vegas market that the uncertainty over amount and timing is what drives people crazy. If you have Canadian origin product in transit right now, confirm with your broker exactly when entry gets filed relative to Saturday, because the entry date is what governs. On to earnings. For its second quarter, ended August 1st, TJX said comparable sales at its Home Goods and Home Sense division rose 7%, and that was on top of a 5% increase a year ago. Net sales for that division rose 10% to $2.5 billion. Chief Executive Ernie Herrmann said even some of the high-ticket areas are doing really well, and that home outperformed apparel at the company in the quarter. Home is now more than 35% of TJX's business across the corporation.
In that same quarter, Marmaxx, which is TJ Maxx and Marshalls and about 60% of total sales, comped up just 1%. Herrmann called the miss self-inflicted and limited to a handful of merchandise areas. For the total company in that second quarter, net sales rose 5% to $15.2 billion, and consolidated comparable sales rose 4%. Second quarter diluted earnings per share came in at $1.36, up 24%. But excluding a 14-cent net benefit from tariff refunds, second quarter adjusted earnings per share were $1.22, up 11%. TJX received $331 million in tariff refunds during that quarter. By our count, TJX is at least the 11th company since early July to book a tariff refund or duty recovery inside a reported result. That list runs from Culp on July 2nd through Ethan Allen, Havertys, Bob's Discount, Our House, Leggett & Platt, Amazon, Purple, Dillard's, and FlexSteel. That is 2 more names than the count we published on August 18th, because Culp's recovery in early July predates the start date we originally gave this thread, and Leggett's furniture, flooring, and textile segment carried 11 months of refunded duties in the quarter we covered on August 7th. What is different about TJX is the disclosure. It put reported and adjusted side by side, and that is worth asking your own suppliers to match. It also puts the underlying earnings growth at 11% instead of 24%. 11 is the number to benchmark against. A 7% comp on top of a 5% comp is an off-price operator taking home business in a month the trackers cannot even agree on. The Commerce Department had the furniture and home furnishings category down 1.2% year-over-year for July, adjusted, while a retail sales tracker had that same July up 2.71%, unadjusted, in our August 11th coverage. Now housing. Pending home sales in July fell 2.3% from June and 2.2% from a year earlier, the lowest reading since January. Realtors chief economist Lawrence Yun said the highest mortgage rates of the year hit right in the middle of summer, and that is pulling back contract signings with large local variations.
Then the construction data, also for July. Completions, the number the report says likely matters most to near-term furniture sales, came in at roughly 1.2 million, down 16.8% from July of last year. July starts fell 13.5% year-over-year. Building permits rose 3.1% year-over-year. So July completions down almost 17% is the near-term problem, because a completed home is the furnishing event, and we have been using a lag of roughly 9 to 21 months from groundbreaking to furniture sale. July permits of 3.1% is longer-term encouragement, and it does nothing for your fourth quarter. Pending sales sit in between, since contracts close in about 60 days, so July's signings are the fall traffic you are staffing for right now. The customer available to you over the next 2 quarters is already living in a house, replacing a sofa or a dining set rather than furnishing an empty floor plan. 3 quick items. Leggett & Platt shareholders approved the Somni Group merger at a special meeting on August 20th. The caveat matters. The company said the transaction still needs 1 required regulatory approval plus other closing conditions, so this is not clearance. Freight moved up again. For the week of August 20th, the Drewry World Container Index rose 4% to $4,526 per 40-foot container, driven by the Trans-Pacific. Carriers are also preparing Panama Canal surcharges beginning in September on Asia to U.S. East Coast and Asia to Gulf Coast routes. And the U.S. and Iran Memorandum of Understanding on the Strait of Hormuz has expired without a lasting agreement, with transits described as severely constrained rather than halted. And a planning note, a survey commissioned by Vevor, a home improvement brand that sells the tools these projects consume, found 35% of households already have a specific project plan for Labor Day weekend, with another 17% very likely to take one on. If roughly a third of your market has already booked that Saturday for a project, the promotion that converts is the one that fits into it.
So, back where we started. For 3 years, the tariff question was a rate question, and you could look the rate up. This week, it became whether you can prove where your goods were made and what they were actually worth, and there is no table for that. There is only your file. That's the briefing. If this was useful, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.